Alright guys, so let's get started. So before I move on to show you how to make the blocks, I wanted to explain to you about the color choices of fabrics. Now, as you can see, I've chosen quite a range of very colorful, bright fabrics with lots of small prints as well as large prints. Now, if you're ever confused as to what sort of fabrics to choose, especially when it comes to florals like this, I know it can be a little bit demanding because it's a lot coming back at you, and you've got to be very sort of confident within your palette selection as how to mix these together. Now, this is a large scale and this is a medium scale, so those are the ways in which I've actually selected it. And these are small scale prints, and I'm referring to the size of the prints on the fabric. Now, if I were to work with these two here, that is fine. In reference to color palette, they work beautifully, okay? And they will work beautifully as well in terms of scale, but I will still need something, a plain tone, i.e. white, gray, light purple, etc., to actually bring it together. All right. When it comes to this one, again, it works because the colors, I can see this popping. There are certain color variations within this particular fabric, the small print, that I can pick up from the big print and still work it together. But if I were to lay it side by side, I think it's a lot of prints and my pattern may get lost. Same with this one. It may get lost, but because of the color here, it will still pop, because I would need this yellow fabric here in order to make whatever pattern I'm cutting with the larger scale to work. Now, if I were to bring back my medium scale fabric and to add it in there, all right, I'm going to remove this one. Again, this works. There is a sort of a white background there that can help it, but it's still a lot of colors coming back at you, and also your color, your pattern may get lost. Now, I tend to use a white background, a green background, a purple background, cream, blue, something plain to help show off the pattern. And in a way, that's cheating, because that is not really getting to grasping how you need to really formulate using tones, colors, and scale within your patchwork. So what I decided was to do was to mix my small print scale with my large print scale. All right, so I have, as I said, small, large, and medium, and I think this works. So I'm not going to use a plain tone fabric here because I really want to make these my focus fabrics, but I also want the prints to shine, and I also want the colors to shine, because I believe you can use them together. So let me show you the patchwork that I've come up with on the block, which is quite simple. It is nothing difficult, and I've simply chosen to use the smaller print here against the medium print, and again I've chosen to use my larger print against the medium print. And you can, okay guys, so I've made all of my blocks now, and I'm going to plan how I'm going to lay it out on the batting. So I roll my batting out. My batting comes double up, so it's obviously folded here at the end. Okay, so what you need to consider is whether or not you need to add borders or not. Okay, at this point, to be honest, I really haven't decided. So what I am going to do is give myself a little bit of a leeway in case, after sewing all the blocks onto the batting, if I wanted to add a strip of border, I can. All right, so you need to decide how much you want to give. So you can do either two things. You can average and say, right, I'm going to do 4 inches, and you just measure 4 inches or 5 inches from the edge and where you want to start. You can do that. or you can give yourself, if you've planned that you want to give yourself 2 borders, so your first border will be say 2.5 inches and your next border is going to be say 5 or 6 inches, then you do the maths obviously and total the amount of space on your batting. But for me today, I think I am just going to literally give myself a little bit more space. So I'm going to give myself a 5-inch border. So I have my ruler here with my markings on it that tells me what's what in terms of the measurement. And I'm going to just measure away from the edge. Now, the edge here is not even, so I'm just going to give myself probably about 1/2 inch or so, and then measure from there, say 5. Okay, so that's where I'm going to start. And I'm going to put that marker there so that I know that is where my 5 inches from the edge is. All right, and I'm just going to move these up, and what I'm going to do is take my longer ruler and simply just measure, if I can get it off, and just simply measure that 5 inches all the way down here and just mark it. Now I'm just using an ordinary pen. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, because you won't be seeing this. Okay, now if you're wondering why am I putting the line, it's so that I don't put my blocks on either going uphill or going downhill. So I want to remain on that line. Okay, so I can do either one thing. I can say, right, I want to start on that particular line there, and then so I start laying out my blocks. Okay, now I average that I am going to put 6 across. So if I know that I've got lots of space at the end there and lots of space on the other side, I don't necessarily need to add the borders, because remember I said here, when I said the borders, I mean the marking for the borders, because I have enough space. Okay, so for my inner sashings and my 3, so on this half of the batting, I can simply fit 3 onto there quite easily. Okay, which in effect gives me enough room if I wanted to add on a border on each side, because as I said, on this fold here I have, and I'll tell you exactly how much space I actually have from the edge of my sashing there. So I have 6 inches from the edge to the edge there, from the edge of the sashing to the edge of the fold of the batting. Okay, so I have lots of space to play with, so I don't necessarily need to measure and mark on the side for that particular purpose. So if my blocks were bigger, definitely I would then need to consider that, but because these blocks come up to 10 inches square, I don't necessarily need to add, because I'm only adding 6 in the rows. If I intend to add another 2 on, then definitely I would need to measure appropriately how much I need on the edges for my border. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is measure up a little bit more. So the next step, after you lay them out, okay, now this step is important, so don't average it. It's important that you draw the line where you want your border to start, and you lay the blocks close to that line as possible so that you know you're nice and straight. Okay, now another tip is that when you put in your fabric or your blocks onto your batting, it sticks to it nicely, so you don't have to fiddle about it. You don't have to put any pins or anything like that. It depends on the batting you're using. I am using 60-40. Okay, so 60 cotton and 40% polyester. Right, so the next step now is because we're going to add an inner border as well. All right, so I already have my inner border measured, and so I am going to just lay it on here like so. So then I know exactly how much space I need to trim my batting off, because remember, it's a quilt as you go by rows. That's the way I do my quilt as you go. So once I have all of this on here, my next objective, I could simply mark it as I did. So I can give myself, say, 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch, okay, and then just mark it on. Now you may be wondering, if it's the first time you're watching my technique, why such a small gap? Well, to be honest, very likely we will be cutting that off. So I would not give, say, 2.5 inches of batting, because you'll be wasting it, because we've got to trim it off edge to edge in order to fold it together. So in essence, what we're doing is creating a seam line with the batting. I hope that makes sense. So hence the reason why I would say do not add too much batting here. Just literally trim it off, say 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, is up to you. All right, so I'm just going to mark again where I want mine to be. So I'm just using say 1/4, and just mark it down, and I'm only marking so I can get a nice straight cut, and I'm putting the edge on the batting of the ruler with the 1/4 inch mark onto the sashing, onto that inner border there, and I'm just marking it all the way down. It doesn't have to be straight or anything like that, because remember, we are going to cut this off. So it's just, these lines are just guidelines. Sorry, just bang the ruler on the table. All right, the lines are simply just guidelines. All right, so don't feel like you must stick to it. Also bear in mind that once we add a 1/4 inch here on each of the sashing and the blocks, we are going to give ourselves a little bit more leeway on the sides yet again. Okay, so I think that's it for now. So I'm going to simply just cut. All right, so now that I have my whole batting open up here now, what I need to do is to just simply continue my markings so that I know where I'm supposed to start. I'm just going to continue with that marking all the way down so that it's nice and straight. And all the way down. Lovely. So what you could do here now is simply put all of your blocks out in a row, and you can decide now where you want to put your markings for your border. So I could simply, because I know the middle here is where the fold was, I can simply start laying the blocks out in that way. So I'm going to start with that one there and put that there. So remember, we are alternating the blocks. Okay, so it's 6 across. Now, if you wanted to, you could do it, you could compile it in 2 rows. So rather than cut it at 1 row, you could simply cut it bigger and sew on to the batting 2 rows instead. Still will work, wouldn't be a problem in that way at all. Might just finish it a lot more quicker than you anticipated. I'll put that one there. So that's 3 blocks on there already. So I think you get the idea of how I'm actually laying the blocks. And so before I move on to start stitching, I am laying the blocks in terms of where I put the top first. So obviously this was sewed on with top and bottom, then sides and sides, just as you would do a quilt top. So I'm laying the blocks out with the top area together first, so I want all of them laying the same way. It doesn't really matter. You could formulate it in any way, shape or form, especially if you want to make sure that the flowers is laying upright, because I'm using the flowered print. I don't think either way it matters, to be honest, because it's an all over pattern, but it's entirely down to you. All right, so I'm going to get the first row completed and then I will show you it, and then I may continue with the other rows sewn on together as a two. All right, so I'm going to continue doing that. I'm going to show you how I start sewing it all on, okay, and then continue with that. Now, if after laying out your 6 blocks you do feel that you have lots on this side, what you could simply do is just average. I'm going to put it all down, and look at that, see, isn't that falling off? It's just hanging there. What you could do is literally average where you want your blocks to start. So let's say I'm going to give myself another 5 inches on the end here for my border, because I've done 5 up there, and I can just simply start this way. That's if your batting comes as long as mine does, and then you continue with your whole 6, and then you trim it off so that you don't have too much batting, because it's a quilt as you go. The objective here is to keep it simple and easy so that you don't have too much of layers underneath the throat space of your sewing machine, so you don't have the issue of having to fight with the quilt top. All right, so you could simply just do that, but work within the lines of which makes you feel confident with what you are working with. And you can see I'm actually pulling up and everything is still stuck onto it. I think that was the last one there, and I'll put that one there again. Just make sure I use my lines to make sure it stays lovely and straight. And trust me, doing the line it's important. Don't miss it. Right, it really does help you to stay on track. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to slide it down again and just get all of my sashings there and put them there. It'd be easier rather than trying to grab them. And so that's, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4. All of this. 5. I've got one more to add on. And the last one is this one here, 6. So that is it there, all right? And so what I want to do now, I could now simply just put my ruler there and cut. Okay, and I'm going to do that now so that I know it's done. And one of the reasons why I'm actually showing you this is because there's a reason. All right, so just going to cut it there. Just not to cut it right to the end. Again, give yourself as much space as possible in case you want to add a bigger border on. So the reason why I'm showing you to do it this way is because when you add the next row, you already know the length of the row you are going to cut. So you're going to line them all up together and just cut it. Hence the reason I decided to show you on camera now. Okay, so that is it. So that is simply my row there. This is going to be a very large quilt. So 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so I'm going to sew this on, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to literally add the other one. Now I'm just going to fold this up here. So when you sew this on, you are going to start, you put the first one down and you're going to take your sashing and sew that front sides together, add your stitch line and fold it back. Okay, now I usually do the quilt as you go in 2 methods. Number 1, sometimes I add my backing and sometimes I don't. So if I wanted to add my backing now, I will cut the strip of backing exactly the same size as this. Okay, and why are you thinking? Well, I'm adding it the same size, the backing, so in case I want to add my border, the back fabric is already there. Okay, so I haven't decided whether or not I want borders, so I'm going to leave it. So the way I'm going to do this one is I'm going to sew everything on first, and then I'm going to put my backing on as one whole piece, and I'll show you how I do that as well, which again is easy. Okay, but either way it doesn't matter. All right, only because I'm only doing it this way because I haven't decided, because the quilt is already going to be very huge, I can see, so I haven't decided whether or not I wanted to add any borders, because that will make it even bigger. So I haven't decided this yet. I will see what it looks like once I do the first row, and I'll make a judgment call then. Okay, so I'm going to continue to sew this on, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just simply give it a nice little iron now that I've sewn all the blocks onto the first row, and just make sure it's nice and smooth. There is no steam on the iron, it's just literally heat, just dry heat. So this is the excess I have here. So obviously all I need to do is trim off a little bit now, but I'm not going to do that just yet. What I am going to do next is to sew on my first inner border. And I have taken two pieces together and give it a bias seam there. And all I'm literally going to do is to sew this front sides down and start at the end. I'm just going to move this long quilt down. Start at the end, and if you want you can pin it on. Okay guys, so first row here, second row just about to be started. So what I have done is just simply put the two rows of batting together, and I have added a pin here so I can line it up with the first row. So I know the first row ends because I can see the end there, and I've just lined it up. If you want you could number them, so number 1, number 2, because obviously it's going to be the same fabric throughout, so you may get a little bit confused. So I just usually like to just number them so I know which row I have put in order. Okay, and so to alternate your blocks, so you started with this block, then I'm going to move on with the other block. All right, so this is going to be my first block for this row. I'm just going to pin it so I know where I'm starting, and then I'm going to continue the process like I did with this one. So, all right guys, so moving on to row 3. As you can see, this is row 2 here, and I have already sewn on the fabrics onto it. Now I just wanted to show you how to prepare for the next row. So what I have done literally is to just fold my second row in half, not my first row, because I don't want to incorporate the size of the border for the second, third or fourth row. Okay, realistically all I have done here is simply to fold it in half. Okay, roll out my batting as you can see, and I'll simply just put it to the end there, and all I'm going to do is just cut it. So that's literally all I'm going to do, is just cut it so that basically I have the same width. Okay, not so much the length, because the roll itself of the batting is folded in half, and so but it's really the width that I'm aiming at to get correct here, rather than always guessing what it is. So in a sense I'm just creating all of my rows. Now for the first row I will do the same, because it's going to be bigger and it's going to be the same width for the last row. So when I'm ready to add my last row on, I'm going to pick up my first row by this time and cut it out, so you can get all of your batting pieces ready before you start joining all of the rows together. That's literally what I'm trying to get at here. Okay, so I'm compiling my quilt in rows of 6. So my first one has already incorporated the border, so the second one has not, third, fourth, fifth has not, but the 6th is going to be the same size as the first one, which is the last row. Okay, so again, number your rows if you want to, so you don't get yourself confused, so that, and get into that habit. Either way, whatever quilt top you're making, get into the habit of numbering the rows so that you're on track every time. All right, so let's move on to the 3rd and 4th and 5th, and then I'll show you how to join these rows together. All right, guys, so I have now 2 rows to show you how to join them together. So I have rows 3 and 4, okay? So just make sure you can actually spot that there. That's the 3, and this is number 4. Now, I like to number the rows so I can just keep on track of where I am. And the reason for that, because I'm obviously starting, as I said, with different colors or different blocks. Now, I have, in preparation to get this ready, what you need to do is trim the batting off to the edge of the inner border here, which is very important. So as you can see, if I fold this back, you can see there's no excess border. You can see there's excess backing there. So not excess border, excess backing. All right. So when I'm ready to join row 3, which is what this is, to row 2, I will then trim this batting up to the edge here of my row of blocks. So 3 and 4 has been trimmed. All right. You're going to need your pins for this one. So very important, what you need to do is to ensure that the rows are lined together. So let's move that to the side for a minute. The rows are lined together. Okay, so what I mean by that, remember we have a starting point in the corner here of whereby our rows actually meet for the starting point to continue to join together. Now, if you wanted to join them in the sense of joining them as like so, it's going to look odd. Why? Because then you'll have to trim it up in order to get your correct area to put your borders on. All right, so it's very important that you line it up. So go to where your mark was and ensure that each intersection here corresponds with each other. So I have my inner sashings here, and I can see they line up fluently. I have my border here for my square, and they line up also. Okay, so the reason for the pins is to ensure that everything stays together. So the first thing I'm going to do is to fold 3 over to 4 and make sure they're front sides together. Now before I start pinning, I'm going to double check as I move my rows together that each of these intersections are in line with each other. There is no point in pinning it together unknowingly that it's not lined up, because this is going to show. My middle sashing here is a very bright color. There's no way you're not going to miss it if it's not aligned properly. So I'm going to ensure by checking. So once I fold it over, front sides together, I'm going to make sure that, number 1, the edge here, these 2 strips match up properly. That's my starting point. Because if those 2 strips match properly, yeah, then I shouldn't have a short fall here. So you can see, hopefully you can see that this end is shorter than the first batting. So the first of all, both battings ends must line up. If that lines up properly, that tells you that, hey, that your blocks should start at the same point here, because then each sashing and each border sashing for the block should line up as well. So I'm just going to check, and yes, I can see that mine is lined up perfectly there. So my first pin is going to be where my yellow sashing is, right there. Because one good thing about working with the Quilt As You Go, for whatever reason, if your blocks haven't lined up, you can slightly pull it, because the batting allows you to do that. The batting is stretchy, so the batting allows you to give it a slight little tug, whereas with the quilt top on its own without the batting, you cannot pull it like that. You would see the movement of the fabric. So I'm going to double check randomly here and see if this actually lines up. Okay, so let's have a look. Yep, and I can see both my sashings are lining up perfectly there. All right, that is the most important thing you need to be concerned of at this stage. So just double check, peel it back, and literally pin. Once you have pinned this, you need to sew a 1/4 inch seam just as you would normally. So you have two options. A, you can use your 1/4 inch feet, and if you are going to do that, you will have to lengthen your stitch length so that it moves a little bit more easily over the batting, or you can use your walking foot. Nevertheless, whatever foot you decide to use, you need to ensure that you do have a 1/4 inch seam. Once we've done that, the next important stage is to iron it open. We must iron it open so that we see the fabrics like that. Okay, that's very important. The reason for that is so that it allows the backing to lay really flat once we've added it on. Okay, so I'm going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. All right, so let's open up and see what it looks like. Okay, so as you can see, that is 3 and 4 that I've stitched together, and it's lined up lovely there, and it's also lined up really beautifully here. So this is very important, guys. See, you want that strip line to continue all the way through. Okay guys, so now that all of my rows are ready and joined together in twos, so I should have, or you should have, 3 rows by now. Okay, so the next stage now is to attach the batting. So I have laid out row 1 here and row 2 here. So it's my first 2 rows I did together. And so I've put my backing down, wrong side up, so that the batting is resting on the wrong side up, so we have the right side on the table. Okay, so what you need to do now is simply place your quilt top, or your 1/4 of a quilt top in this case, on your backing fabric. Now you need to leave about 1 inch at the side here, because we need to use that to join, so that's important. So do not forget to do that. So do not bring it to the end. I mean, even if you do, in realistic terms, even if you do bring it right to the end, you must remember the other piece must have that extra 1/4 inch in order to join. All right, because we're going to just fold it over as though you're doing a binding and stitch it on. So you need to place your quilt top with your batting onto your backing fabric, and then you're literally going to cut it. Okay, now notice here that I have made sure that I incorporated my borders, and I'm doing that here also. All right, so I am not joining the 2 fabrics together from this edge here. I am incorporating the whole thing so that once I add my borders on, it is already done also at the back. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. So what I'm going to do now is simply cut it down. Now, before I move on any further, I haven't basted it. It is simply just on there so that I can measure and cut. I have, however, add some long pins at the top, edge to edge, so that it doesn't move when I lay. Okay guys, so I just wanted to point something out that I noticed as I was quilting here. So I literally started quilting one of the panels. Now I'm going to refer to it as such because this is 2 rows together and we've got another 2 rows and another panel. So in total we have 6 rows, all right? Just to make sure and confirm that. So I'm just going to refer to this whole thing here as a panel, okay? Now what I really wanted to point out is the difference between quilting a traditional quilt and a non-traditional quilt. And a non-traditional here is the method of which I quilt as you go in rows of 2 or rows of 1, depending on the size. Now, look at the amount of room I have here on my Quilter's Choice sewing machine. Look at the amount of room. So much room I have here on the throat space. Now, if I were quilting a normal quilt, like for example, I can refer back to last week, I quilted one of my quilt tops that was already made, and obviously it was not a quilt as you go, it was just an ordinary quilt top which I pieced and quilted normally. And that quilt rolled up to about there, which gave me this amount of space here to work with. But look at the difference. If I did make this quilt here that you're looking at, if I constructed it as a normal traditional way, i.e. you make your quilt top, the whole quilt top as a queen size, including all the borders, and then add it onto the batting, that quilt would have been rolled to about here, okay? Or it would have been bunched up to about here, out there, and you've got the whole quilt to be turning and tugging and throwing over your shoulders. You don't have that with this. Look at the amount of space I have here. I have probably got about, 2 inches of just quilt on the wall here of the computer. Nothing much at all. I have loads of room. And when it comes to the quilt itself, it's just laying on the table at the back. And I'm working myself this way. So once I quilt, it's just coming down, as you can see, in front here. So I just really wanted to emphasize how easy it is to work with this particular method. It really does take away the stresses of having to move about this large quilt. And as I said, this is a queen size quilt we're making here. So I just really compared myself, and moving forward, I do a lot of quilt as you go now. If you've been following my channel, you would have noticed that. But last week when I quilted that quilt, I just reflected. I was like, whoa, look at the difference. Immediately, I can see I am not tugging and turning. And if you look at that video, you'll see the difference for yourself. Now, how much times I had to turn that quilt in order to finish, because I did show some of the quilting. But I hope that really helps you to decide that the sort of quilt as you go method that I'm working with here, that I'm trying to teach here, is a very simplistic form, especially if you know you struggle with it. Now, the quilting method that I'm using is just meander with just little flowers, only because of the print that it is. It's no point doing something really intricate because it's going to be lost within the print pattern here. Okay. All right, guys, so I have now stitched it all together and you can see it here. Now, this is the important stage I referred to, and I have my little iron here on. It's on steam also, okay? It's on steam because I wanted to lay those seams open flat really nicely for me. So what I tend to do is just run my finger along it so that I can open up the seams, and then I continue to just iron with it. Okay guys, so now that everything is opened and I have my extra fabric here trimmed to about 1 inch, okay? If it's less, that's fine too. Just don't make it half an inch. I think that's a little bit too small because we really need to cover this raw edge here. That is the aim. All right, so what I'm going to do now, normally I just sit at the machine and do this particular movement, i.e. I fold it over to where that raw edge is that I want to hide, and then I fold it over again. All right, so that it is nice and flat on the actual quilt itself, and then you can pin. But as I said, I usually do it literally at the machine as I literally sew, and I think it's easier in the sense that I'm cutting a step out. I am not folding and then having to unpin. I'm doing the motion in one go. But this is very similar to just simply if you're adding on binding. Hi guys, the quilt is completed now. So this quilt measures 72 by 76 and it's a beautiful queen size. Now it looks absolutely gorgeous. One thing I love is that the mustard yellow has really framed those fabrics and make it the focus of the actual quilt. On the borders I use a grungy sky sort of print for it, and it's very sparkly. I'm going to go in close so you can see that. Also for the diamonds as well, which is on all 4 of the borders, I did a little bit of motifs on them just to highlight it, and you can see the quilting here. So I did a lot of sort of paisley, roses, leaves. There's lots of mixtures of quilts prints in there, so the quilting was really easy to do on this. Didn't take long at all, and because I compiled it into 3 panels, so remember this is one panel here where you see that seam line, and you may not be able to see it because the objective of this quilt as you go is to hide the fact that you completed it in that way. No one will know the difference, that it's not an ordinary quilt top unless you actually tell them. On the back, which I will show you very quickly, that joining, as you can see, is clearly easily identified. Now if you wanted to hide this, if you use a busy print like this, no one will know. Obviously I do this so that you can be able to see it. Okay, I have nothing to hide, so, and I don't mind showing it off that it's a quilt as you go, because it is an easy technique. It really is such a fun process quilting a large queen size quilt. But this doesn't bother me, and it comes about very easily, and there it is on the other one. All right, but guys, if you did enjoy this video, and if something you've learned from this is that you can definitely make a queen size quilt on your domestic machine quite easily using my quilt as you go technique. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit that notification bell, give the video a thumbs up, and let me know what you think about the quilt. Alright guys, so that being said, bye for now and happy quilting guys. Love you lots. Enjoy.